talk about some of the connections between different forms of sexual abuse and exploitation, and how just understanding those, I think, advances our efforts to combat all these wide-ranging harms. So let's just go ahead and get moving here. So I'm just, last night, some of the speakers, we got together with the event organizers, and we were having a little conversation about why we were here. And it was really moving. It was a really special night, and it was so inspiring. It gave me hope. And I have to say that in the past few months, I've been in a pretty dark place in this work that I've been in for now 20 years. And I've been feeling very hopeless. But being here has really helped me just feel so much more encouraged and inspired, especially by all you young people. So thank you. I think this is at least part of why we're here. This is part of what unites us in this vision that we have for a world free from sexual abuse and exploitation. So I'm just delighted to be able to share with you and to help just lean into this work with you. And let's see what we can do to stop all this junk that we got listed up here, right? This is the junk that we work on, these horrible abuse and exploitation issues. Everything from sexualization of children and sexual objectification, sexting, the child sexual abuse, images, sexual assault, sex trafficking. So, we really try to touch on all these issues. And a lot of what we do is wanted to help people see that these things don't exist sort of in their own lane, but they intersect and connect with each other and kind of create this reinforcing loop, these cycles of exploitation that fuel each other. And we think it's important because we get so many people who really have a specialty in their lane. So there's a tremendous movement of people working to prevent child sexual abuse. They're in their lane. There's a tremendous movement of people working to prevent domestic violence, but they're in their lane. There's a massive global movement to prevent sex trafficking, but they're in their lane. But what we want to do is say, wow, well, you know what? We see how this issue, child sexual abuse and domestic violence and sex trafficking and all these things are actually interconnected. They have things that connect each other. And we think we could advance the entire movement if we talked about those connections more and all work together. Even though we all want to maintain our specialties, we want to all work together. So that's a lot of what we're focused on at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. So to start going through some of these connections, I'm going to start with something that is pretty relevant to Nevada, a conversation about prostitution and sex trafficking. Okay, so it's important for us to recognize that all sex trafficking happens within the prostitution marketplace. All right? The prostitution marketplace, the strip clubs and brothels and places where people are bought and sold for sex. When people are sexually trafficked, they're not trafficked to Dairy Queen, right? You don't find them there. You find them where? Where these marketplaces for the trade in human beings for sex exists. And this is important because if we want to find victims, we have to know where to look for them. So this is part of the finding exercise. We're going to find them in strip clubs. We're going to find them in illicit massage parlors. We're going to find them in brothels, red light districts around the world. We're going to find them in some hotels, sometimes from the Ritz-Carlton to the seedy place, in your town, to our computers. There's been this massive online marketplace for people who are bought and sold for sex. So this is the prostitution marketplace, but I call it the sexual exploitation marketplace. And why do I say that? I say that because paid sex is coerced sex. Paid sex is coerced sex. Right? If you have to pay somebody for it, it's not free. It's not freely given. And this is a hugely important point because, there's so much conversation these days about consent and obtaining consent, and people think, well, I paid for it, or she's selling it, so I've obtained consent. But if you paying for it is the proof that she doesn't want to have sex with you, or he doesn't want to have sex with you. People who truly desire each other and want to be together can be together.
Right.
The payment is the way that you entice, manipulate, basically abrogate that person's opposition, the lack of their desire to have sex with you.
Right.
So there's nothing freely given about it. So, and then let's talk about this phrase sexual exploitation, because I'm going to be using it quite a lot. What do I mean by sexual exploitation? So let's get a little formal, and we'll defer to the UN here. So this is a definition that they've come up with. It says sexual exploitation is defined as any actual or attempted abuse of position of vulnerability, differential power, or trust for sexual purposes, including but not limited to profiting monetarily, socially, or politically from the sexual exploitation of another. This is a sweeping definition, and it's perfect for talking about all of prostitution, because who profits socially from it? Who profits politically from it? Okay? And whose vulnerability is being exploited in the prostitution marketplace? So, in our work, a lot of what we're doing is helping people break down this market so that we can, look at the supply chain, if you will, that's connected to the provision of people for sex. So we have this supply. This is where people are turned into products, right? Where we turn vaginas into workplaces, right? Our intimate body parts are turned into work zones. But the supply are the women, men, and children who are bought for sex. The demand are the people who are buying them. And importantly, overwhelmingly, we know particularly from some recent research such as has come out, it's been consistent for decades, but it's still overwhelmingly men who are the purchasers. So I recognize that there are women who do purchase other people for sex, but I will be referring to the demand as male, because they just constitute the overwhelming majority of those who are participating in the commercial sex market. And then you have the people who distribute, who make sure that there's bodies available to be bought and sold. These are people that some people we hear them referred to as pimps, but pimps and traffickers are functional equivalents of each other's. Okay, so if you know what the definition of trafficking is, it talks about recruitment, harboring, transportation, provisioning, obtaining, using force, fraud, and coercion in order to exploit a person in commercial sex industry. That's how we define trafficking. That's what traffickers do. That's the exact business model of pimps. They recruit, they harbor, they transport, and provision, and obtain people using force, fraud, and coercion for the purposes of exploiting them in the commercial sex industry. So, that really pimp is sort of a euphemistic term in a way. It is a legal term, but it's become rather sanitized or kind of turned into a cultural joke in our society. But these are violent sexual criminals, okay? So we have supply, demand, and distribution. And altogether, the system, which is a global system, it's all over the world, constitutes an organized supply chain of sexual exploitation. Right? Because, again, if paid sex is coerced sex, this whole system is exploitive. And it's serving this element that we don't talk about, the buyers. Probably not a lot of you are aware, but there's this massive discussion going on right now in our country about full decriminalization of prostitution, which means that it's no longer criminal to be sold in sex, but it's also no longer criminal to buy a person for sex. It's no longer criminal to be a distributor, to be a pimp or a trafficker. You just are magically recategorized as a manager. Okay, how nice. All right, but these are the people whose choices drive the entire sex trade. These people's choices are the ones who fuel it. Their demand is why we have prostitution, it's why we have sex trafficking, because sex trafficking is a representation of the fact that there's not a sufficient supply of bodies in the prostitution marketplace. So there's a predatory dependence upon a supply of people who have to be round up. You know, the traffickers are taking care, they're like subcontractors. They take care of the violence, the force, the fraud, and so that other guys don't have to jump out of the bushes and rape people. Okay? That's what they do. To satisfy these invisible people, these people who remain largely invisible. But thank goodness for Robert Kraft, because they're not invisible anymore. Okay. I never thought I'd be happy about a sex flyer, but I actually, I'm rather grateful for Mr. Kraft and what he's done to elevate a conversation that has not been taking place, and which is critical to our conversation on trafficking. So my overarching point here is that context matters. Okay, so because talking about sex trafficking without considering prostitution is like talking about slavery without considering the cotton fields. We wouldn't do it. It wouldn't make any sense. We have to consider the context. But this is exactly what happens all the time. People, well-meaning people, who are even working in anti-trafficking, anti-sex trafficking, do not want to have a conversation about prostitution. But your efforts to combat sex trafficking are only as good as your policy and your understanding on prostitution. We will fail in our efforts to combat sex trafficking if we do not succeed in our efforts to combat the demand for commercial sex. If we do not work to shrink the normalization of the commercial sex trade. All this work is moot. All right, we're just the dog chasing our tail. We're in the hamster wheel. Keep going and going. Let's pull another girl out while another one gets dumped in. Right. I'm getting a little tired of it. So, did you see a link? I just made a link. I'm linking prostitution and sex trafficking. Now, another really critical point here is that these, particularly, there's, again, the sex trafficking movement, amazing work that's been going on for 20 years, but a lot of it is focused on children. And you know why? Because they don't want to have a conversation about the adult women. Because why? Because it's just portrayed as a choice. They're just, who said that?
Cowards.
Woo! Dude!
That's all I have to say, that's cowards.
Well, that's what's going on. It's been going on now. I mean, okay, none of us want to see children bought and sold for sex. At least none of us in this room. But I can tell you there are people who think that's fine. I just debated one of them a couple weeks ago at the University of Virginia. She has no problem with 15-year-olds who decide that they want to sell themselves.
I almost feel sorry for her.
Okay, I do too.
Almost feel sorry for her.
Oh yeah, almost feel sorry. But back to my point is that, okay, for a lot of people who end up in prostitution, just because they turn 18, I mean, a lot of them have entered as kids. And then they have a birthday, and then what? They're 18, and now what? It's a choice. Now they're no longer a victim. They're just a hoe. They're just a prostitute. But what I want people to understand is that for most of the adult women who are involved in prostitution, they have all kinds of people who they have experienced abuse and violence at the hands of the men who buy them, the hands of the people who are managing them. And it's the same types of violence that they would be experiencing if they were kids. Now they're 18 and they're considered adults. But yet, a lot of society whitewashes that and just says, oh, well, you're just a hoe. This is what you chose. This is, more power to you. What power? What power? You call this power? Being branded? This is what happens to a lot of these women. Okay. Moreover, we get a link with the issue of pornography. Because for many women who are involved in in prostitution, various forms of prostitution, there's pornography that's made of them. This is a way that they're marketed, right? Because nowadays people have websites and they're going to be advertised. So pornography, these sexualized images of them, is part of how they're made available to the sex-buying public. And other times, the pornography is made surreptitiously, because the men who buy these women want to have a trophy. They want to have a prize for their, have a record of their encounter. So they'll actually use these spy cams and videotape themselves with these women. And then that'll be uploaded to sites on the internet and shared with the world. So that's just one way in which pornography and prostitution and trafficking are intersecting. Now here, Dr. Melissa Farley, who's really a world-renowned researcher in the area of prostitution harms, has documented that in her interviews, at least women reported at least that about half of them were saying that pornography was made of them while they were in prostitution. And interestingly, we see another connection in that the buyers are actually requesting specific acts that they saw in porn that their partners maybe don't want to do, right? So they'll go to these individuals in prostitution expecting them to do those things, those pornography-inspired ideas. There's a major connection between strip clubs, prostitution, and sex trafficking. Okay, I don't expect too many of us here have had interactions with strip clubs, been there, but it's possible. But I guess what I'm saying is, don't be naive about what goes on there. Okay? It's not just about a girl wearing a bikini or flashing her boobs at the end and walking off stage. Okay? Many of these places, there's real sex acts happening. There's lap dances, there's backroom VIP rooms where real sex is exchanged. So strip clubs are often just fancy ways of labeling prostitution. And moreover, these are hotbeds for where women and girls are trafficked through strip clubs all the time. It's one of the main places, like the FBI talks about, for identifying victims of trafficking. And in this particular research, what was interesting is that in the interviews with buyers, both men who bought and men who didn't said that you could find kids. If you wanted to find a kid, go to a strip club. Okay. That's what they were reporting, telling these researchers that, we're pretty sure you can find kids for sex for sale in strip clubs. Now, let's shift gears. Let's pan back a little bit and talk to them about schools. What kinds of things are going on in our schools across the country? And these are just some typical headlines. You can find stuff like this almost every day, tragically. 3rd grade students access pornography at Jacksonville Elementary School. New Jersey shop teacher admits sexually abusing 2 former students numerous times. Sex traffickers target kids at local high school. Security in place on school Chromebooks after mom says son saw sexualized murder video. AP uncovers 17,000 reports of sexual assaults by other children at schools across the U.S. Police bust Virginia sex trafficking ring involving more than 100 teens. Police, children recruiting other kids for human trafficking at school. And 17 people, including West Valley High School football coach, arrested for alleged child sex crimes. It's a war zone out there. It's rough. It's rough out there. Now, in this pornified culture that we're in, kids now are their own pornographers, right? They're self-producing their sexual exploitation images. Of course, they're trading them with each other, and then somebody trades that on. So we've really made it easy for the pedophiles, right? This is a pedophile's dream, the world that we're living in now, with kids so so sexualized, so ready to turn themselves, to self-objectify, to produce these kinds of images. And kids who are with developing brains, who don't understand, whose frontal lobes, their executive decision making is not fully developed right now, so they're making these rash, impulsive decisions. We're handing them these devices that are incredibly powerful, expecting them to manage them like adults, right? But anyway, so now we also have this very visual culture. Everything's so image-driven. There's so much pressure on girls to live up to the pornified ideal, that this hot, sexy ideal. This is how women are supposed to. Girls think that they're going to get love. We heard about that a lot earlier from Tim and Sandra. The need for affection and intimacy, and what they're doing to fill that void in their lives, thinking that they send this boy this picture that they're going to get affection that they're so hungry for. But interestingly, there's a lot of research that's coming out on this, but here's just one example, that there's so much coercive pressure on the girls. And it's astonishing to me, because there's such a minimizing of this so-called sexting issue among young people. Like, oh, it's just kids being kids, and oh, that's no big deal. But, I mean, they're self-pornifying, right? They're producing, it's like sexting is practice for porn. Sexting is practice for, this is what one of my friends says. I'm borrowing his line. But anyway, in this case, the girls, when they analyzed 500 accounts from teenage girls who described being pressured from boys, and found that 2/3 were asked to send explicit photos in exchange for affection. So we're getting this transactional element to the relationship. Right? The boys are expecting this. If you want my affection, this is how you get it. You have to earn it. I don't know how many girls have gotten this kind of message. Right, ladies? Mm-hmm.
Sick of them.
Yeah, sick of them. Send nudes. Another connection that we see is between dating violence and pornography. So the research shows that adolescent dating abuse is associated with more frequent pornography use, viewing pornography in the company of others, and being asked to perform a sexual act that a partner first saw in pornography. Approximately 50% of adolescent dating abuse victims report that they have been asked to do a sexual act that their partner saw in pornography. All right, so pornography is a script that's inspiring behavior and sexual requests. And then another really startling thing is that you see this kind of course, I don't think the boys mean it to be this way, but the images that they're collecting, it becomes kind of a social currency. All right, I'm going to start collecting images from girls. And I can show them to my friends, and I'll be cool, and they'll show that I'm like the young stallion of the school because I have more images of girls than my friends. This will give me street cred. So you have this collecting, and then it becomes, well, gee, who else collects porn? Pedophiles, right? Don't they collect? They have vast collections of pornography. So it's just scary to me that at these young ages, boys are learning to collect, and they share, oftentimes without permission. They're just distributing these images on. Now, in this particular case that was out of Australia, you had 70 Australian schools were targets of a perverse pornography ring of teen boys and young men secretly swapping and exchanging graphic sexual images of female students and other non-consenting women. Now, what I want you to note is, like in the third paragraph, they talk about how they were, young men used the site to nominate the specific high school or region they were fishing for nude photos from, along with the full names of girls they were hunting. Okay? Hundreds of individual names have appeared on wanted lists. So this is highly predatory behavior that boys are learning to engage in. Here's a case reported in the New York Times. In this particular instance, students at the school described a competitive point system that classmates used to accrue photographs. Different point values were assigned to different students. Students who collected naked photographs gained points by adding these desirable children to their collections. And then the kid that ended up with the most, they termed the pimp of pictures. Okay? So this bleed over then of pornography, this dehumanization, this just, endless supply of pictures, and of course, why wouldn't you start doing this with each other? Just asking for nude pictures if you're seeing pornography from the time you're 9, 10, 11 years old, and why wouldn't you ask girls for nudes? Why wouldn't you start collecting these pictures? So then all this can be put under an umbrella of image-based sexual abuse. There's lots of different types of issues that fall under this heading. There's this phrase that we know as, quote, revenge pornography, where people will send the nude images of somebody that they've been involved with after a breakup as sort of a form of punishment to others. But sometimes that's not always based on revenge, so it's not necessarily the best term. But there's this unconsensual distribution. You have phenomenon like upskirting, people intentionally taking pictures of women's skirts when they're out in public. You have issues like spy camming with, again, this surreptitious filming of people that can be set up in like women's restrooms, in hotel rooms. It's been an absolute massive problem in South Korea. A huge problem that women are going to actually demonstrating about. It's become such a massive problem. Another really serious thing that's going on is called deep fake pornography, where now with some very simple software you can take real pornography and superimpose a different person's face on it. Okay? You have absolutely no control over this. This has happened to many women who are famous in movies. So Scarlett Johansson is an example of someone who's had this done to her. But as well, it can happen to just the average woman. And there's women who talk about their lives are wrecked because somebody decided to collect a few photos of them and slap their images on pornography. Now you have just been transformed into a porn performer. All right, now in the interest of time, we're going to skip some stuff, but hopefully you're seeing some connections here, right? So this intersectionality of issues, it's really, there's so many things. And I'll just say here, because I want to get to some other points. Today's common themes in pornography involve things like teens. Incest is a huge theme in today's pornography. Huge theme. Choking, racism, violence, slavery, sexual torture. These things you can easily find within a few clicks. It's not like you have to do a deep dive to find this stuff. And we hand these kids devices, give them to them in school, give them to them as parents because, we want a convenient babysitter. So, you wouldn't take your kid and dump them in set them in the middle of a XXX store and say, go play. But you give them these phones, these devices. It's the equivalent of dropping them in the middle of the adult bookstore.
And then you don't monitor it, blame somebody else.
Exactly. So
Every last one that happens should be on the news, because the news doesn't cover every last one. But we have to find it on social media, and that's a shame.
yeah, this is not stuff that's discussed. It's just normal. There are literally millions of people consuming these types of pornography, looking at it, seeking it, masturbating to it, and repeating. Day after day, millions of people in this country and around the world who are looking for this type of content every day. So, child-on-child sexual abuse is a huge, or harmful sexual behavior is a massive problem, and we're working on that at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. Big issues with the impact of pornography use on the brain and development of compulsive sexual behaviors. And then the sum total of effects, I mean, the research on the impacts of pornography exposure to children, pretty staggering amount of things that have been shown, everything from negative body image to actually adolescent delinquency and criminal behavior, and of course impacts on their developing brains, but really massive range of impacts on kids. And the thing is, these particularly, there's increasingly girls who are struggling with compulsive sexual behaviors. Also, our boys are just overwhelmed with this issue. And I mean, they want help. They want help. So, for instance, this 14-year-old wrote, "I want help. I want it to end. I want to be able to go to school and not have pornography on my mind." So many of my thoughts and so much of my time is consumed by porn, and it's alarming. Porn has such a powerful control over my life. I don't know what to do. So we have got to have the talk. Do you want Google to teach your kids about sex? You want YouTube to teach your kids about sex? Do you want kink.com to teach your kids about sex? Or are you going to? Have the talk again and again. We have an action center that you can get involved and push back against some of the ways in which pornography, the porn industry is normalizing and mainstreaming itself. So you might want to check out our action center. For instance, we had a big campaign recently on YouTube because there was a wormhole where pedophiles were, basically YouTube was, through its algorithm, doing the work for pedophiles for them. These weren't actually what we would consider child pornography, but that doesn't matter to pedophiles. They would find a point in a film where a girl's dress flipped up or something was exposed, and that's what they were looking for. And so this YouTube had this massive problem that they weren't addressing. So we had to launch a campaign against YouTube. We have a project called the Dirty Dozen Project, where we name mainstream entities that are contributing to the normalization of sexual exploitation. Typically it's corporations, sometimes it's been government agencies, and sometimes it's been nonprofit organizations. This is something we've done for multiple years now, and it's helped. The goal is to, one, shine light on what these entities are involved in, to help the public be made aware, but also to empower you, right? Because I think we all feel overwhelmed. We see the pornification of our culture. We see the hypersexualization. Sometimes we even know what these corporations are up to, but what can I do, right?
State of Nevada.
The state of Nevada. Well, yeah, we named them this year because, we're just fed up with the prostitution laws here, right? The normalization, the legalization of prostitution, and what the staggering amount, the massive amount of sexual harm that has resulted from Nevada's regulated sex trade here it's incalculable. The amount of lives that have been train wrecked because of this, and the amount of human suffering. So we decided to call Nevada out for it. And we have had some big successes. Now, Ref Content was never actually named to the list, and this is probably a company you've never heard of. Maybe you haven't. I hope you have, because they're really great. But we wrote them a letter because we were concerned. They do what's called native advertising. And so when you go on web pages and you see all those ads on the side, they populate those ads. We're one of the big companies that did that, or do that. And you know how many of those were clickbait? You remember, that term clickbait, right? Well, we wrote them a letter. Eventually they wrote us back. You know what? They got rid of it all. They absolutely got rid of all their sexual identifying images. They have human eyeballs on almost every single ad. So this is just one of the successes that we can get when we work together to combat the normalization of sexual exploitation. So I invite you to check out our website, come by our table, and again, thank you all so much for caring enough to try to join together to create a world free from sexual exploitation.